Hello everyone, this is my take at the Maven's recent data drill. Let us quickly go through the question. So we have been given a data set with around 900,000 rows in it, and it contains data of user IDs who have taken certain lessons. So a certain lesson ID is attached with the lesson that they have taken and the date on which they have taken that lesson. So a particular user is identified by their user ID, and on any particular date they may take more than one lesson, which is identified by the lesson ID. They may take lessons on consecutive days or skip days, and this is how the dataset has been designed. The task that we have been given is to create a leaderboard of the top 10 users based on the longest daily active streaks. Let us define what a daily streak is. A daily streak is a user taking at least a single lesson on a particular date consecutively. So for example, let's say this user ID 101 has taken lessons from 10th of September up until 12th of September, and then their next lesson thereafter was on the 18th of September. So there was a break from 12th to 18th. So this will be considered a 3-day consecutive streak from 10th to 12th of September. Then we'll add the word active to it. The active streak means that the user must have taken a lesson on 28th of September, because for the purpose of this drill, we are considering that the current date on which we are performing this task is 29th of September. So let's say this particular user, which has a user ID of 101, has been taking consecutive lessons from 25th up until 28th. So they have a 4-day consecutive streak, and this streak for this user ID of 101 will be called an active streak. Now our task was to create a leaderboard of the top 10 users based on the longest daily active streak, and then the challenge was to find how long is the third longest active streak lasted. It's open to the user to perform this task on their tool of choosing. Since this is a particularly advanced sort of task, so my choice of tool for such tasks is always SQL. So let's get to the tool. First task was obviously to get the CSV file that was given to us to the database. I've loaded the table as you see on the left of the screen. The table name is lesson streaks. I'll walk through my approach. I'll try to break down my logic step by step. So first thing first, let's quickly have a look at the data that we have. Right, so it's basically has been divided into 5 columns. We have a lesson ID, a date on which that lesson was taken, the user which took that lesson, the name of that user, and each particular lesson, irrespective of if they have been taken on the same day or not, has been assigned an ID, a row ID, you can say. So basically this column is a unique identifier. Now getting back to the code. So in such cases, or generally when I'm writing SQL code, I try to break down my steps so that I can get my thought onto the screen and sort of break down my steps, which I can later on code out. So what I did was I sort of decided that since the task required us to consider the current date to be 29th, and also we had to filter out users who are active, and active, as I said, being defined as those users which have had taken a session on the 28th. So as a first step, I would filter out the users who have a session on the 28th or the 29th, and then I would basically partition by, so basically we would use a window function here, and basically would try to partition them by user ID so that we can sort of create windows for each user, and then order those lessons for each users in ascending order. Then we sort of create an interval. So we subtract the current date of each lesson from the previous date or the previous row to sort of get an interval between, and this interval is in days between 2 lessons. So this step is done basically so sort of identify any days for any particular user when the streak was broken, or in other words, to put it simply, if the user did not continue for consecutive days, we can identify those and sort of rule those out. So basically I would assign the intervals, and sort of, as I said, we would filter those out if the interval was greater than 1. And just to reiterate, if the user has taken lesson on the 28th and also the interval is nothing beyond 1, that means we do satisfy the criteria of an active streak. Then once we have reached up until this point, basically it's just a grouping and aggregation that we have to perform. So we have to count the number of days for each user, order of the consecutive active days that they've taken a lesson, to identify the top user or top second or top third or so on and so forth. It's a personal preference. As long as it's not hampering the query execution, I sort of prefer the CTs. But here I found that the temporary table approach was a bit clearer to sort of break down the steps. So first of all, I created a temporary table. I named it active streak. What this basically is doing is that this subquery, first of all, let's break down the code inside out. So if you look at this subquery, first of all, it's identifying the distinct users from the base table that we have in our database. And for each date, it's sort of identifying if the latest lesson that user has taken is on 28 or 29. So basically, this step is to rule out those users whose most recent lesson is beyond 29th, let's say 30th of September and so on. Because as I said at the beginning, we are considering for, at least for this task, that the current date is 29th. So even though our dataset has dates beyond 29th, but we will consider those as unseen future and we'll sort of filter those out. So this subquery is basically doing that. And we are basically selecting all of the data from lesson streaks, ruling those dates out which are beyond these 2 dates. Then in the next temporary table, I've named in streak summary. What we're doing is that if we do look at a table of the base table, you will see that a user may take more than 1 lesson on one particular date. Since as the next step, we had to create this days interval column in our dataset, what I did in this temporary table of streak summary was I sort of selected the distinct dates, user ID and username, so that if there are repeated or if there are more than 1 lessons for a user on a particular day, I can only select any one of those. So basically it will just select the first. It doesn't really matter whichever it does select, because all I'm interested in is at this point is that if the user has taken at least a single lesson on a particular day, I count that. So this particular temporary table is doing that. Within this temporary table, I sort of created a CTE. Within the CTE, what I'm doing is I've selected the unique sessions, and then within those unique sessions, I'm creating the days interval column. So if I run this out for you guys, so you'll see that this particular user, Tom Palmerson, their first lesson was on the 1st of May. And then they've taken consecutive days, and henceforth this days interval column, which is just counting. So basically what it's doing is it will just pick up the date in the current row. Let's say this one. It will subtract this date from the date in the previous row. So the 2nd of May subtracted from the 1st of May would give you the days interval of 1 day. So we are jumping from 1 day. So if you scroll down, if you just eyeball the data, you will easily be able to identify any jumps or breaks in streak for a particular user. So this particular user has taken consecutive lessons all the way from 1st of May up until the 17th of May, and then they've skipped 18th, and then they took a lesson on the 19th, and then after 19th they took the next lesson on the 31st, and then on the 1st of June, and so on and so forth. So this particular step was just to sort of create this column of days interval, and you'll get to know why this column is useful moving forward. Right, let's move forward then. Now this is another temporary table that I've created. I've named this consecutive days summary. And what this is doing is that for any user which have broken their streak anywhere from their first lesson up until the 29th of September, it will basically select the most latest date on which they had broken their streak. So let me run this code for you, and you'll get an idea what I'm talking about. And let me also run this so that we'll have a look at it together. All right, so let's say this user ID 168145990 broke their streak on 19th, and they again broke their streak on 31st. So what this max date does is, because I've selected this max date here, it will look at each particular user. Let's say we are looking at Tom Palmerson right now. It will scan their entire data, which is no later than the 29th of September in this case, because as you remember previously we have filtered it. And within it, it will look at each row, and for only those rows where the days interval is not equal to 1 because of this where clause, which in this case we have 2 rows, the 19th of May and the 31st of May. And out of these two, it will select the latest date because I've put in this maxed date function. So it won't pick the 19th, it will pick the 31st. And as you see in the result for this user ID, which corresponds to Tom Palmerson, we see 31st of May instead of 19th of May. Reason is because if I would have created a logic where I would have picked the 19th of May, then moving forward, the streak would have been broken a second time on the 31st. So we want to capture the latest date on which the streak was broken so that we can count the days from that day beyond up until 29th as a consecutive streak, as a consecutive active streak, should I say. So moving forward, so in this step, I'll basically run you through first a couple of iterations where I run into errors because I wasn't getting the right answer, although I was able to execute it right till the end, but I wasn't getting the correct answer. And I'll let you know the reason what I figured out after debugging. So as the next step, what I did was I created a CTE named streak length. So I'm selecting everything from streak summary, which is the temporary table that we have created here. Then I put a clause in here, and then we have a subquery with the date column in this streak summary column in the streak summary table. Let me run this as well so that you guys can see what we're talking about. All right, so what I was trying to do is this is the table of the streak summary, as I explained before, and then this is a table of the consecutive summary where it captures the maximum date for each user where the streak was broken. So within the CTE of streak length, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to join the rather not join but filter the streak summary table. So it will iterate through each row of the streak summary table, and for each row it will check whether that date is greater than, due to this comparison operator, max date of the S2 table for that particular user ID in that current row context. So let's say we talk about Tom Palmerson. It will go through the first row. It will check if 1st of May is greater than 31st of May. Obviously this fails the condition, so it will exclude this row, and similarly due to this logical condition, it only keep those rows for Tom Palmerson which are beyond 31st of May, which is the maximum date. So it will include the 1st of June and onwards. So basically what this comparison helps us do is filter out those dates which occurred prior to the streak broken. So we only consider those days for Tom Palmerson where we have a consecutive streak unbroken up until the maximum date, which can be 28th or 29th. So let me scroll down completely to show you guys as well. See, the maximum date is 29th of September, and you see during the entire duration of my scroll up until the 1st of June, the days interval equals 1. So this shows that there's a consecutive streak from the 1st of June up until the 29th of September for Tom Palmerson. So basically this was my logic for this CTE. And then coming down, what I did was I applied a group by on user ID and username. And then I used a window function dense rank to basically create a ranking of the users based on their count of days interval. So count of days interval, for example, is once we have filtered out those days that are prior to the streak being broken. Now this count of days interval, or rather this should be count of steric, because we sort of want to count the rows instead of just their days interval column. So what this will do is it will just count basically aggregate the rows for each user because we are grouping on user ID, basically user ID, username. I could have excluded username, but sort of to show the name of the person as well in the final results that I included this column. But basically, primarily, the logic we are using is we are grouping on user ID because that's a unique identifier for each user. We're sort of aggregating the count, which is the number of streak days. And then I've used a window function to sort of, once the streak days column is created, on top of that, it will create this window function of dense rank to sort of rank those in descending order, because I've ordered on descending right here. I've given that alias leaderboard, and let us run this and show you what this comes out to be. Let's see, it has returned 145 rows. Basically, what we have sort of achieved what the question says, but it isn't the correct result, and I'll let you know why that is. So basically, our output contains 4 columns. User ID and username is identifying the particular user. The streak days column is the number of days where they had a consecutive streak, and this leaderboard column is basically ranking those in descending order of streak days. So the individual who has the longest streak gets a rank of 1 on the leaderboard, and so on and so forth. So the question was identify the third longest active streak, and if we go into this table and if we see the rank third is given to Helen Mellon, who has 96 consecutive streak days, and if we enter that here, you will see that isn't the correct answer. So this was my first sort of iteration, and then I debugged and to identify where the error lies and what has gone wrong in my logic. So what I identified was that if I scroll up and come to this table, or rather this CTE, you will see this condition which is filtering out only the days which are greater than the max date for a particular user. Now let us consider those cases. Coming back to here, so what this doing is it's sort of, as you discussed, it's filtering based upon the max date. Let's consider a use case or an edge case where a particular user has had consecutive streaks, but their streak was never broken. So hypothetically, let's say their streak began on 17th of May. From the 17th of May up until 28th or 29th of September, they have taken at least a single lesson each day without missing even a single day. So if that is the case, then the days interval column for that particular user, again, that's not Tom Palmerson, I'm just taking an example, and that's why you're seeing this particular name on the screen. But we have such cases in the data set, so that's the reason I'm discussing this. So if that's the case, the user will have a days interval of 1 for each row, which means that they will not have, if we scroll up and come back to this particular temporary table of consecutive days, this means that that particular user who does not have a break in this streak will not appear in this particular temporary table of consecutive days, because it will not meet this particular requirement of days interval not equals 1, right? And since it will be absent from this temporary table, when you are comparing, when you're using the temporary table in this subquery here, it will be absent from this subquery. So let's say one is being run and the dates are being iterated row by row in this particular CTE on the streak summary table. It will check each date of that particular user's session and compare that to the max date from the consecutive days summary table. But since it will not find that particular user's user ID in this S2 table, it will not have any max date. And since it will not have any max date, the comparison sort of turns out to be, let's say the date is 2025 greater than nothing. So sort of this would evaluate to a null, and null would get, or an unknown, and that would get excluded. Which means that that particular user, despite having a consecutive streak up until the latest 29th or 28th of September, will get excluded from the output wrongfully, which is not we want. So this basically is where the error lies, and the reason why we're seeing an incorrect result set in the final output, which we run here. To sort of get around that, what I tried to do as a second iteration was that I included this OR clause in this pair filtering condition. And what this OR clause is doing is it's checking that if in the streak summary table that particular user does exist, but it does not exist in the consecutive days summary table, we do include that. So by filtering each date, it will check this particular first condition. If it doesn't meet, it will check this particular condition. If it does meet this condition, it will include that. So that way we should be able to overcome the problem that we were facing earlier of excluding the users which streak hadn't broken. Let me run this and show you what the error comes up. Right, so I've just run it. If you see right at the bottom in the output pane, you will see that it says error code can't reopen table S2. What basically happens is, and although I believe my logic is right here, but sort of the semantics of the code itself, because we have certain limitations from the programming language that we're sort of writing our logic or translating our logic into S. So I would say this limitation isn't from the logic, but sort of from the semantics of the language itself. What SQL doesn't allow is, or at least MySQL doesn't allow, is that you'd see that it's referring to the streak summary, which is the temporary table that we had created earlier. Now, since it will filter row by row, while it's executing a particular row for streak summary table, it will check this condition or this subquery, this one that I've just highlighted. And this particular subquery needs to access the consecutive day summary table, which again is a temporary table. And if you remember, this consecutive days summary table is itself referring the streak summary table. So while it has this streak summary table already open, it can't reopen the streak summary within that same query run. So basically that's what this can't reopen table s2 error translates to. So I'll just put this back in comments, and this is the final and the correct iteration that I'll come to now. Let's uncomment this code and I'll run through. So up until this point, up until creating this point of creating 3 temporary tables, this is all correct. We had run into errors from this point onwards. So this particular code that I'll just run through now takes continuation from the temporary tables that we have created earlier. So we have created a CTE named streak length. What this is doing is, instead of going to a filtering condition from here, I've utilized a left join condition here. So it's joining the summary table with the consecutive day summary table, again giving them aliases. It's a left join, which means we'll be taking all rows from the S1 table and the common ones from S2. The join condition again is the user ID. Now this is the important part, the filtering condition, because we know that in the execution itself, the join condition is performed before the where. So once it has joined everything, once it has joined both the tables, and let me run this out for you to show you. So if you just run this up until the join condition, I've just excluded the filtering as of now. Let me run through the output. So since it does include everything from the streak summary table, so it will include all the rows of each user right from the first session up until the maximum of 29th or 28th, whatever the maximum session is. And since we have performed a join, it basically joins them on the user ID and attaches this max state column to each of the user. So again, for Tom Palmerson, the max state was 31st, so that gets repeated for each of the rows. And for those users which only had consecutive sessions and no break in between, such as Stan Pancake, you will see nulls throughout their max state because there wasn't any max state in the consecutive days summary. Now, if we come to the filtering condition, there are 2 filtering conditions separated by OR. I'll run through them one by one. The first one says s2.maxState is null, which means that this max state column, which exists in this s2 table, which is shown right here, is null. So this way what happens is, for those users such as Stan Pancake who doesn't have any max state, they do not get excluded in our output. We've included them in this filtering condition. And the second condition, we have given them, the second condition is s1.date is greater or equal to s2.maxState. So for particular users such as Tom Palmerson, only include those rows where their sessions is greater or equal to the max date, because max date represents the date where the streak was broken. So for when we do include, and I'll show you, I'll just run this momentarily. When we do run this filtering condition, you will see that all the rows for Tom Palmerson will be excluded. If I just scroll down right up until this point, so all these rows on the 19th of May and prior to these, all these rows will be excluded because of this filtering condition. And it's important to include this equals to, because we want to include this 31st of May. We don't want to exclude that because it will incorrectly deduct one day, because the consecutive streak for Tom Palmerson starts from the 31st and not from the 1st. And what this OR is important, that we have included the OR instead of AND because we want either this condition or this condition. So let me pin this, and now let me run this entire thing for you. Now see, for Tom Palmerson, all the rows prior to the 31st of May have been excluded. So we only have rows after 31st. And we also, again, if we scroll down, we still have rows for Stan Pancake. So basically satisfying both of those things. Just quickly exclude this and come. Now again, this is the same thing that we had done earlier. We are grouping by user ID, username from the streak length. Streak length is the name I've given to this newest CTE. Again, the same count of the rows, length rank over order by count, static descending as leaderboard. Now let me run this. Here's our output. This is Stan Pancake, which we had earlier excluded wrongfully because there were no broken streaks for Stan Pancake. Now we have included this particular individual. And coincidentally, this particular individual is ranks the first as well on the leaderboard with 152 consecutive streak days. And so on and so forth. If I scroll down, we have the entire table to ourselves. And since we had used genstrang, you will see that all those users which have the same streak days do get the same rank. And you'll see Nico Photon is right at the bottom. The question was to identify the person that's ranking third on the board, which is Chuck Buttonrut. His streak days is 121. Let's go to Maven's website, 121, submit, and voila, there you have it. You've got a right answer. That's my take on the Maven's most recent data drill. I'll link the link to this data drill as well as my code as well, the GitHub link to MySQL code beneath this video. If you're watching this on YouTube, or in the post itself if you're watching this on LinkedIn, go out and try it yourselves. Keep learning and good luck.